And we say, ooh.
Man, picture this late at night, lights low, and that smooth groove of Nights Over Egypt floating through the speakers. You close your eyes and it feels like the music is carrying you somewhere far, somewhere timeless. That's the magic of the Jones Girls. Three sisters out of Detroit who gave us classics, who poured soul into every note, and yet somehow their name doesn't sit up there with the giant. While other groups from the 70s and 80s get all the shine, the Jones Girls remain one of the most underrated forces in R&B history. Why did the industry turn its back? Why did their story fade while their songs still live on? Let's get into their story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Before the world ever knew them as the Jones Girls, they were just three little sisters growing up in Detroit: Shirley, Brenda, and Valerie. Man, Detroit in the 50s and 60s was a whole different kind of energy. The auto plants were booming. Motown was just across the way, and every block had kids dreaming of music as their ticket out. For the Jones family, music wasn't just a dream, it was everyday life. Their mother, Mary Fraser Jones, was a gospel singer herself. She didn't just sing in the church choir, she ran the choir. And y'all know in the black church, the choir director is the heartbeat of Sunday morning. The girls grew up watching their mom hold down harmonies, arrange voices, and pour spirit into every note. That influence? It stamped them for life. Imagine being little kids, and instead of cartoons or toys, your soundtrack is live rehearsals in the living room, mom at the piano, neighbors dropping by, folks cooking in the kitchen, and harmonies filling the house. That's the world Shirley, Brenda, and Valerie were born into. Music wasn't some hobby, it was their foundation, man. But Detroit wasn't all sunshine. The city was tough. Racism, economic struggles, whole neighborhoods fighting just to stay afloat. The Jones Girls weren't raised rich. They were raised resilient. Their community gave them love, but it also gave them grit. You had to be strong. You had to know how to carry yourself, and you had to believe in your gift even when the world tried to tell you otherwise. And that's what they did. From early on, the sisters were singing in church programs, community talent shows, and any stage that would have them. They weren't chasing fame, yet they were chasing the feeling. The way the crowd lit up, the way their voices blended so tight, you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. People started whispering, "Those Jones Girls can sing." Little by little, the seed was planted. With a gospel foundation, a tough Detroit backdrop, and a mother who believed in their talent, the Jones sisters were setting the stage for something bigger than anyone could imagine. By the late 60s, the Jones sisters were no longer just the little girls harmonizing in church. They were starting to make moves, taking that gospel foundation and testing it on bigger stages. Detroit was overflowing with talent, but it wasn't easy to break in. Man, imagine trying to shine in the same city that produced Smokey Robinson, The Temptations, Diana Ross, all those Motown legends living just a bus ride away. The pressure was real. Still, the sisters had something different. Their voices locked together so perfectly that it sounded like one voice splitting into three. They weren't just singers, they were a unit, a harmony machine. People in the neighborhood started calling them the Singing Sisters, and whenever there was a block party, wedding, or school function, the Jones Girls were the ones who stole the show. But life outside the music was no fairy tale. Their family wasn't wealthy, and being young black women in America meant doors were often closed before they even knocked. Racism was everywhere. Opportunities were scarce, and the music industry was ruthless. You had to have not only talent but thick skin, because labels and managers would chew you up and spit you out if you weren't careful. That didn't stop them. The sisters leaned on each other, building strength in their bond. Shirley, the oldest, was like the anchor, steady, disciplined, with a maturity that kept the group grounded. Brenda brought fire and edge, a confidence that pushed them forward. And Valerie, the youngest, had a sweetness in her tone that gave their harmonies that extra magic. Each sister brought something unique, and together they created a sound that couldn't be duplicated. Their first real taste of the professional world came through background singing gigs. They hustled to get noticed, sometimes singing behind local acts, sometimes recording demos, anything to prove they had what it took. It wasn't glamorous long nights, little pay, and no guarantees. But every time they stepped in front of a mic, They knew they belonged. Detroit may have been tough, but it gave them their toughness. Gospel gave them their soul, and the dream of making music together gave them purpose. The Jones Girls weren't just preparing for a career, they were preparing for a journey that would carry them from the church pews of Detroit to the world stage. Stepping into the '70s, the Jones sisters started carving out their lane in the industry. They weren't headliners yet, but their harmonies were so undeniable that bigger names began to take notice. And man, once Diana Ross heard them, the game changed. Picture this: Diana Ross, fresh off her Motown throne, looking for singers who could match her elegance and stage presence. She came across the Jones Girls, and instantly, she knew their voices could carry her show to another level. The sisters joined her as background vocalists, and just like that, they were thrust into the world of glitz, glamour, and non-stop touring. Imagine being young women from Detroit, suddenly flying across the world, performing on the biggest stages, rubbing shoulders with stars. That was their reality. And they didn't just blend in, they elevated every performance. Fans and critics alike noticed the way Ross's concerts suddenly had a richer, fuller sound. The Jones Girls weren't in the spotlight yet, but their presence was undeniable. They became known as the secret weapon, the voices behind the Queen. Working with Diana Ross opened doors. Other Motown and R&B heavyweights started pulling them into sessions. They sang behind Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin, and even Lou Rawls. Think about that for a second. Those are names carved into the history books, and behind some of their legendary performances, you had the Jones sisters weaving in harmonies that made the records complete. But here's the bittersweet part. As background singers, they weren't getting the recognition. People vibed to the music, clapped at the concerts, but rarely asked, "Who are those voices?" And that's the underrated story right there. Talent so good it carried others, but still left them in the shadows. Still, the sisters saw this as training ground. Every night on stage with Diana Ross was like a masterclass: how to command a crowd, how to dress the part, how to handle the chaos of the industry. Every studio session with Marvin or Aretha taught them professionalism, timing, and the power of subtlety and harmony. By the mid-'70s, the Jones Girls had built a reputation in the industry: reliable, soulful, and professional. They weren't household names yet, but insiders knew these girls could sing. The stage was set. All they needed now was the right deal, the right producer, and the right moment to step into the spotlight as stars in their own right. That right moment came when the Jones Girls crossed paths with the powerhouse team at Philadelphia International Records. Man, if you know your music history, you already know PIR was the place in the '70s. Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff were running the show, crafting hit after hit with acts like Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Teddy Pendergrass, and the OJs. Philly soul was smooth, sophisticated, full of lush strings and tight rhythm sections, and the Jones sisters fit that vibe like they were born for it. Gamble and Huff saw something in Shirley, Brenda, and Valerie that went beyond just background harmonies. They saw three women who could carry records on their own. The label signed them, and finally, the sisters were no longer just the voices behind the stars, they were becoming the stars themselves. Their first recordings under PIR weren't overnight chart toppers, but they carried that signature Philly soul polish. Songs like Children of the Night showed off their ability to blend haunting themes with heavenly harmonies. Even if the radio didn't blast them on heavy rotation at first, the critics and insiders were paying attention. And here's the thing, man. The timing was both perfect and cruel. Perfect, because the late '70s was a golden era for R&B groups, and the Jones Girls had the look, the sound, and the talent to ride the wave. Cruel, because competition was fierce. The Emotions, Pointer Sisters, Sister Sledge, they were all dropping hits left and right. The Jones Girls had to fight for every inch of spotlight in an industry that often didn't have room for multiple female groups at once. But talent doesn't lie. Little by little, their reputation grew. DJs started slipping their tracks into mixes, club crowds started moving to their grooves, and those harmonies, man, those harmonies were impossible to ignore. They weren't just copying the Philly soul formula. They were putting their own spin on it. Their blend was tighter, their delivery softer yet stronger, with Shirley's lead voice soaring while Brenda and Valerie wrapped around her like silk. By the late '70s, the Jones Girls had moved from the shadows of background work into the warm glow of recognition. They weren't headlining arenas yet, But the whispers were getting louder. These sisters are the real deal. And soon enough, they would land the hit that finally pushed them into the national conversation. By the end of the '70s, the grind was starting to pay off. The Jones Girls weren't just session singers or opening acts anymore, they were finally stepping into their own lane. And in 1979, man, that's when the real breakthrough came. Their single, "You Gonna Make Me Love Somebody Else," hit the airwaves like a lightning bolt. Produced under Philadelphia International, it carried that perfect Philly groove, tight bass line, lush strings, and those harmonies stacked like velvet. The moment Shirley's voice came in with that commanding lead, supported by Brenda and Valerie, you couldn't ignore it. Radio DJs spun it heavy, clubs blasted it, and suddenly, the Jones Girls were climbing the charts. The song cracked the Billboard Hot 100 and stormed the R&B charts, putting their name out there in bold letters. For a group that had spent years in the background, this was validation. Imagine being known as the voices behind Diana Ross and then hearing your own song blasting through speakers across America. That feeling had to be surreal. Fans were catching on quick, and critics were calling them the new standard for female harmony groups. And they didn't stop there. They followed it with Dance Turned Into a Romance, another track that showed they could balance elegance with energy. It was smooth but still funky, the kind of record you could play at a club or spin on a late-night radio show. Their self-titled debut album, The Jones Girls, dropped in 1979, and it was stacked with gems. Songs like "I Just Love the Man" reminded everyone that this group wasn't built on one lucky single, they had depth. The industry started to notice. They appeared on TV specials, opened for major artists, and headlined their own smaller shows. They weren't yet at the same commercial level as the Pointer Sisters or Sister Sledge, but people in the know were already calling them one of the tightest vocal groups of their era. And man, you could feel their pride. They had put in years of work, of touring, of standing behind somebody else's mic, and now they had fans screaming their names. Shirley, Brenda, and Valerie were still grounded. Still the Detroit girls raised on gospel, but now they were also charting stars. Still, here's the crazy part. Even in their breakthrough, they didn't get all the shine they deserved. Industry politics, label priorities, and the constant competition for radio spins meant they had to fight to stay visible. But talent has a way of forcing its way through, and the Jones Girls weren't finished yet. They were about to deliver a song that wouldn't just make them stars, it would cement their place in R&B history forever. If You Gonna Make Me Love Somebody Else was their arrival, then Nights Over Egypt was their masterpiece. Released in the early '80s, this track wasn't just a song, it was an atmosphere, a mood, almost a spiritual experience. Man, the first time those opening chords hit, it felt like stepping into another world. The groove was hypnotic, the percussion was subtle but powerful, and those harmonies, they floated like whispers carried on desert winds. What made Nights Over Egypt so powerful was that it didn't sound like anything else on the radio. While disco was fading and funk was morphing into new wave R&B, the Jones Girls dropped a track that was mysterious, cinematic, and timeless. It wasn't a chart-topping single at the time, radio didn't quite know what to do with it, but the people who heard it never forgot it. DJs spun it in underground clubs, soul stations kept it alive, and decades later it would be rediscovered as a cult classic. The song carried layers of meaning. For many listeners, it wasn't just about romance, it felt like a celebration of Black identity, a connection to history, culture, and pride. That's why so many fans still say it opened doors in their minds, inspiring deeper connections with heritage and even spiritual exploration. It was art that went beyond entertainment. Live performances of the track were electric. The sisters would step on stage, dressed with elegance, and as the music swelled, the crowd was transported. People have said you could close your eyes during Nights Over Egypt and feel like you were literally being carried away. That's the level of power the Jones Girls held when they sang together. But here's the underrated story again. While the song became iconic to fans, it never got the commercial recognition it deserved. Other groups at the time were landing bigger deals, more TV spots, more press. The Jones Girls, despite delivering one of the most hauntingly beautiful R&B tracks of their generation, still didn't get the same push. It's wild, man. How can a group create something so lasting, so influential, and still not get their flowers? Yet, time has proven the power of Nights Over Egypt. Modern DJs remix it, producers sample it, and younger artists cite it as inspiration. The track has lived far longer than many of the so-called hits of that era. It's proof that while the industry may overlook talent in the moment, true art refuses to die. By the early '80s, the Jones Girls had carved out their place not just as background singers turned stars, but as architects of music that touched the soul. They had the talent, the records, the legacy in the making. But as the spotlight grew, so did the shadows waiting behind it. Man, here's where the story takes a turn, because as bright as the spotlight was, the shadows were just as heavy. The Jones Girls had the talent, the hits, and the momentum. But the music industry, y'all know, can be a cruel game. First off, let's talk about the label politics. Philadelphia International Records was a powerhouse, but it was also crowded with acts. Teddy Pendergrass, the OJs, Harold Melvin, and the Blue Notes, big names who pulled in big dollars. And labels always put their money where the biggest returns were. That meant the Jones Girls, even with their hits, didn't get the full push they deserved. Marketing budgets went to others. Radio campaigns favored the bigger stars. And the sisters were often left to hustle for scraps of attention. And man, that's crazy when you think about it. They gave the label classic songs people are still playing today, yet the machine didn't fully back them. That's one of the biggest underrated tragedies. Talent was there, but the system wasn't built to elevate three young black women in the same way it elevated others. Then came the grind. Touring non-stop, city to city, barely resting. That glamorous picture of being on the road? Behind the scenes, it was exhausting. Long nights on buses, endless rehearsals, pressure to always look perfect, always sound perfect. Add to that the financial reality because despite selling records, artists didn't always see the profits. Labels took huge cuts, managers took their share, and by the time it trickled down, the Jones sisters weren't living like stars. They were working like stars, but still struggling like everyday people. And here's the personal side. Being family in the industry is both a blessing and a curse. Shirley, Brenda, and Valerie loved each other, no doubt. But being in business with your sisters can test every bond. Decisions about money, about direction, about trust, it all weighed heavy. Arguments happened, misunderstandings grew, and the pressure of balancing love and business only added fuel to the fire. Let's not forget sexism, too. The industry in the '70s and '80s wasn't built for women to thrive without constant battles. Promoters underpaid them compared to male acts, journalists gave them less coverage, and executives often underestimated them. It's wild, because their harmonies could run circles around most male groups, but respect didn't come easy. Through it all, the sisters pushed forward. They still recorded, still performed, still gave everything they had on stage. Fans never saw the cracks forming. On the mic, they were flawless. Backstage, they carried the weight of an industry that didn't protect them, and that weight only got heavier as the '80s rolled on. Music trends shifted, disco faded, new wave and synth sounds took over, and the market for traditional R&B groups started shrinking. The Jones Girls had to fight not just industry politics, but the changing tide of popular taste. What was soulful and timeless sometimes got labeled as old-fashioned by radio execs chasing the next trend. So here you had three sisters with platinum-level talent, undeniable records, and a loyal fan base, but they were stuck in the middle of an industry that didn't value them the way it should. They weren't falling apart yet, but the cracks were visible. And sadly, the conflicts of the business would soon mix with something even heavier, the struggles of life itself. As if the industry battles weren't enough, life itself started throwing blows that no amount of talent could shield them from. The Jones Girls had weathered label politics, financial struggles, and the grind of touring, but nothing hits harder than personal loss. Through the '80s and into the '90s, their careers slowed down. The hits weren't charting as high, the label's attention had shifted elsewhere, and the music landscape was changing fast. Hip-hop was rising, R&B was evolving, and many of the harmony-driven groups of the '70s and early '80s found themselves pushed aside. For the sisters, that meant fewer opportunities, smaller shows, and the painful realization that the spotlight they once fought so hard to reach was dimming. But they kept going. Shirley pursued solo work. Brenda and Valerie still performed when they could, and together they held on to the dream as long as possible. Fans who loved them never forgot. but the industry wasn't kind to groups whose time had passed. And that's another part of being underrated, man. When the machine decides it's done with you, it moves on fast. Then came the hardest moments of all. In 2001, tragedy struck twice. Brenda Jones passed away at just 46 years old, taken far too soon. Only months later, Valerie Jones also passed, at the age of 45. Two sisters, two voices that had carried some of the most beautiful harmonies in R&B history, gone within the same year. Man, can you even imagine? For Shirley, it wasn't just losing bandmates, it was losing blood, her sisters, her partners in everything they had built. The Jones girls weren't just a group, they were family. And now, that family was forever broken. Fans mourned, the industry barely noticed, and Shirley had to carry both the grief and the weight of keeping their legacy alive. What makes it sting even more is how their deaths highlighted the way the industry uses and discards talent. These women gave decades to music, gave us classics that outlast trends. But when tragedy hit, there were no big headlines, no tribute specials, no award show moments. Just silence, except for the fans who kept their songs alive on turntables, mixtapes, and in their hearts. That's what underrated looks like in its harshest reality. Legends to us, forgotten by the mainstream. And yet, through that pain, Shirley pressed on. She continued to perform under her own name, sometimes billed with the Jones girls' legacy, making sure audiences new and old never forgot Brenda and Valerie. Every time she sang, "You Gonna Make Me Love Somebody Else," or "Nights Over Egypt," it was more than a performance, it was a tribute. The loss of Brenda and Valerie could have silenced their story completely, but Shirley's resilience and the devotion of fans who never stopped playing their records kept the memory alive. It's heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time. Heartbreaking because two lives ended so soon. Inspiring because their art refused to die. This is the duality of the Jones girls' conflict, battling an industry that undervalued them and facing personal tragedies that would have broken most people. They stood in the spotlight, then in the shadows, and ultimately in the hearts of those who truly knew their worth. And even through the tears, one thing remained clear: the Jones girls had created something that outlived both the industry's neglect and life's cruel turns. When people talk about influence in R&B, they often skip over the Jones girls, and that's the crazy part, man, because their fingerprints are all over the music that came after them. The harmonies, the phrasing, the soulful blend, they planted seeds that sprouted in the '90s and beyond. Take Escape, for example. In 1995, they recorded "Who Can I Run To?", a cover of the Jones girls' original from 1979. For an entire new generation, that song became an anthem. Most fans thought it was brand new, but the truth? They were hearing the magic of Shirley, Brenda, and Valerie reimagined. Escape themselves have said the original inspired them, and that shows just how timeless the Jones girls' work really was. Then, fast forward to today, Silk Sonic, Bruno Mars, and Anderson, Pac's retro soul project. That smooth, polished R&B vibe, it doesn't exist without the blueprint groups like the Jones girls laid down. When people talk about bringing back real R&B, what they're really saying is, bring back that soul, that harmony, that magic that the Jones girls delivered effortlessly. But it's not just groups. DJs and producers around the world have kept their music alive through samples and remixes. Nights Over Egypt has been flipped, looped, and reimagined in countless ways. It shows up in house tracks, hip-hop beats, and chill-out compilations. It's wild what started as a haunting soul ballad in the early '80s turned into a global vibe that DJs still reach for when they want to set a mood. And let's not forget the crate diggers, the vinyl heads. For years, records by the Jones girls became prized possessions, the kind of albums DJs bragged about owning. Their work turned into underground classics, circulated in clubs, basements, and small radio stations long after the mainstream stopped paying attention. That underground love kept the flame burning. Even younger artists who never lived through their prime are catching on. Social media has resurfaced their tracks, playlists on YouTube and Spotify introduce new fans every day, and suddenly kids who weren't even born when Brenda and Valerie were alive are vibing to their music. That's real legacy. It reaches across time and touches people who never knew the story, only the sound. So yeah, while the industry might have overlooked them, Their music never stopped living. The Jones Girls might not headline history books, but they shaped voices, inspired movements, and built bridges from gospel to soul to modern R&B. That's influence that can't be erased. After Brenda and Valerie passed, it would have been easy for their legacy to fade into silence. But Shirley Jones refused to let that happen. As the eldest, she took on the responsibility of keeping their music alive, not just as a performer but as a guardian of her sister's memory. She launched a solo career in the mid-'80s, releasing her album Always in the Mood, which gave her the chance to step forward in her own right. Tracks like Do You Get Enough Love hit #1 on the R&B charts, proving she had the chops to carry a project by herself. But Shirley never turned her back on the group identity. At concerts, she performed Jones Girls classics, honoring Brenda and Valerie every time she stepped on stage. Fans who came to see her weren't just watching Shirley, they were experiencing the spirit of all three sisters. That continuity made sure the Jones Girls story didn't stop in 2001. And here's where the underrated part really hits. Look at how other female groups from the same era are remembered. The Pointer Sisters are celebrated. Sister Sledge's We Are Family is cemented in pop culture. The Emotions are praised for Best of My Love. All legendary acts, no doubt, but the Jones Girls delivered records just as powerful, just as timeless. Yet their name doesn't ring the same bells outside of true R&B circles. Why is that? Part of it comes down to timing and promotion. They didn't get the crossover push that put some of their peers on mainstream pop charts. They didn't have the giant marketing budgets or the industry narrative crafted for them. And when you don't get that kind of support, history tends to overlook you even if the music speaks louder than words. Still, the true fans know. The DJs know. The artists who grew up secretly studying those harmonies know. That's why, when their music resurfaces in samples or gets covered by newer groups, people are stunned. Wait, that was the Jones Girls? That shock is proof of both their impact and their underrated status. Today, Shirley continues to wave the banner. She performs around the world, often billed as Shirley Jones of the Jones Girls, reminding audiences that the group's story isn't finished. Every performance is a history lesson and a celebration, tying the past to the present. So when we talk legacy, it's not just about influence, it's about resilience. Even without the awards, even without the mainstream tributes, the Jones Girls carved a permanent place in the soul of R&B. And that, man, is the truest form of immortality. Man, when you look back at the story of the Jones Girls, it's like a bittersweet melody. Three sisters from Detroit, Shirley, Brenda, and Valerie, raised on gospel, hardened by the struggles of their city, and gifted with voices that could stop time. They worked their way from church pews and neighborhood talent shows to the biggest stages in the world, singing behind Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, and Aretha Franklin. They put in the grind, they learned the craft, and then they finally stepped out into their own spotlight. And when they did, they gave us classics. You Gonna Make Me Love Somebody Else wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. The Jones Girls were here, and they were undeniable. Then came Dance Turned Into a Romance, I Just Love the Man, and of course, Nights Over Egypt. That track wasn't just music, it was magic. To this day, it takes people somewhere else, somewhere beyond the everyday, into a place that feels eternal. That's not just a song, that's legacy carved in sound. But here's the crazy part, the heartbreaking part: they never got the recognition they deserved. While their peers were celebrated on award shows, plastered across magazines, and given primetime respect, the Jones Girls were often left on the sideline. They were praised by those who knew, loved by the fans who listened, but the mainstream machine didn't lift them up the way it should have. That's the very definition of celebrity underrated. And then came the personal tragedies that no one could have prepared for. In 2001, both Brenda and Valerie passed away within months of each other. Two-thirds of the group, two-thirds of the harmony, gone far too soon. For Shirley, it was a devastating blow. For fans, it was like losing family. And yet, the world at large barely noticed. No big TV tributes, no sweeping headlines, just silence except for the voices of those who kept the records spinning. But here's the thing, man. Their story didn't end there. Shirley carried the torch, continuing to perform, releasing solo work, and keeping her sisters' voices alive through every note she sang. Fans kept digging out vinyl copies, DJs kept dropping Nights Over Egypt in their sets. Younger artists kept discovering and covering their song. The Jones Girls lived on through the music, through the influence, through the love of those who refused to forget. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a question. Shouldn't the Jones Girls be mentioned in the same breath as the Emotions, Sister Sledge, the Pointer Sisters? Shouldn't their names be written in bold right next to the giants of R&B? If talent and timeless music are the measure, then absolutely, yes. Maybe the charts didn't tell the whole story. Maybe the awards didn't reflect the truth. But the fans? The fans knew. They still know. Every time someone hears Who Can I Run To and traces it back to the original, every time a DJ drops Nights Over Egypt and the crowd goes wild, every time Shirley Jones steps on stage and sings her heart out, that's proof. Proof that the Jones Girls will never fade away. And maybe that's the most powerful legacy of all. Fame can fade, trends can die, but real music, soulful, heartfelt, spirit-filled music lives forever. The Jones Girls might not have gotten every flower they deserved in their time, but in the hearts of true music lovers, their garden is still blooming. So we'll end with this. Brenda and Valerie, rest in paradise. Shirley, keep carrying that flame. And to the world, don't forget these sisters. Don't forget their harmonies, their struggles, their triumphs. They may not be in every hall of fame, but they're already immortal. Because when you press play on their records, the Jones Girls live forever.